Hello, everybody. My name is Dr. Justin Mogilski, and this is Psych 101, Introduction to Psychology. The first thing that I teach any of my students is that when someone gets in front of you and says that they're going to be teaching you something for an extended period of time, you should probably figure out what their credentials are. What qualifies them to lecture to you about this topic? I'm going to give you two lines of evidence. One, I'm a doctor. I've earned a PhD. What that means is I spent a considerable amount of time training in a very particular domain of knowledge. Having a doctorate does not mean that you know everything. In fact, quite the opposite. It makes you keenly aware of what you do not know. There's a vastness to human knowledge, and I only have access, any one of us only has access to a very small sliver of it. Number two, though, what I've done, so I am a professor, I teach, it's something that I enjoy incredibly, but part of my job is not just that I teach, but I have to perform scholarship or original research. To do that, what I do is I actually collect data from people. I formulate hypotheses based on prior theory. I then create surveys, experiments, collect data from people, both in South Carolina and throughout the world, to test those hypotheses, gather data to perform statistical analyses, test the hypotheses, write up the results. I then submit those results to what's called a peer-reviewed journal. And from there, my work gets vetted for quality by my peers. Those of you who are not familiar with what a peer-reviewed journal is, you take the data that you've collected, you submit it somewhere, and these are other people within the field that you've collected this data who are not motivated necessarily to see you publish. They rip apart your methods, they question how you've collected that data, they question how you've interpreted that data, and hopefully after this very long and arduous process, it gets published somewhere. So what I have done is I've collected data, I've tested these kinds of hypotheses for a good long while, and I've published a number of peer-reviewed articles on very broadly relationship science, human mating, the things that people do within romantic, sexual, and intimate relationships. I'm going to give you a little bit of a sampler of where I published and what kinds of topics I have published on. Very broadly, I've looked at things like mate poaching, which is when if you are single, instead of seeking someone who is currently single as well to start a romantic relationship, you go after someone who's currently in a romantic relationship. I've looked at the various reasons that people dissolve their relationships, why people break up. And this is a particular example published back in 2016, titled Staying Friends with an Ex, Sex and Dark Personality Traits Predict Motivations for Post-Relationship Friendship. One of the unique contributions of this particular study is we wanted to know when people break up and then they stay friends with their ex, why do they do it? Prior to this research, there hadn't been really a documented, comprehensive list of reasons that people stayed friends with their exes. So what we did was we asked people, well, why do you stay friends with an ex? We took these many reasons that were ACT nominated to us. We then created a measure that people could fill out where we identified about 7 different reasons. And I want to highlight a couple of them. One, things like reliability and sentimentality. That is, they wanted to stay friends with an ex because they were an important part of the person's life. They had an ongoing friendship together. They were someone who they had shared secrets with, someone who they leaned on for emotional support, and they didn't want to give that up. And that was the most common reason. The second, unfortunately most common reason, were what we labeled pragmatic reasons. And these were things like, well, they had a lot of money, or they had a car and they were capable of driving me to work. Then there were some other reasons like, well, we shared a social network. That is, we had friends together, and so we didn't want to make things awkward in that friendship group. Or we had children together, and we wanted to stay amiable. We wanted to stay friendly for the sake of the children. And then also one of the reasons that popped up was I wanted to continue to have sex with this person. So we identified these different reasons, and then we looked at some of the predictors, some of the things that predict whether you report that you've stayed friends with an ex for one of those particular reasons. And we examined 2 characteristics. One, whether a person reported being male or female. And then also these traits that are called dark personality traits. Very broadly, these refer to a person's willingness to exploit another person for personal gain. That is, are you willing to do something shitty to another person if it personally benefits you? So we found a couple of interesting findings here. One, that first off, men, unsurprisingly, perhaps are more willing to stay friends with an ex in order to continue to have sex with that person compared to women. Everyone was more likely to report staying friends with an ex for those reliability, sentimentality. They were there as a friend. They wanted to keep them as a friend. But in terms of these dark personality traits, so what happens is we can measure these traits using an inventory, and people score relatively higher or lower on that trait. That is, they're more willing to exploit other people for personal gain, or they're less willing. People who reported greater willingness to do that were more likely to report staying friends with an ex for those pragmatic reasons. That is, that person was simply useful to them. They had money, they could fix stuff, they could drive them places, and also, again, to have sex with their partner. So revealing some of the motivations behind why people stay friends with their ex-partners. Aside from looking at romantic relationships, part of romance is competition, is attraction, not just between people who are looking to get into a relationship, but often conflict among those who may be seeking a similar partner. And so I've looked at different types of conflict, fighting, and what happens after fights that you might observe. Now, if anyone's gone onto YouTube and you've just searched for street fights, you'll find tons on there. If you look up these videos, you'll see people who have recorded actual fights, usually between men, where they wail on one another. They get into these really deep, sometimes bloody fist fights. And then afterwards, they almost always engage in a particular behavior, shaking hands. This is something that you see after many different types of conflict. You'll see this in sporting events. What happens is you go out on the field, you play that game, and no matter who wins or who loses, one of the first things that coaches often encourage their players to do is go to the other team and shake their hand. Now, what this is described as is it's good sportsmanship, right? You're showing respect for the other team. But in terms of the function of that behavior, what it does is it makes it less likely that in the future, if, say, there are tensions left over from the conflict, you've got this lingering resentment towards one another, what shaking hands can do is it can make it less likely that will occur, that future conflict will occur in the future. That is, you want to stay on good terms with one another. So the reason that coaches often encourage good sportsmanship is it's not arbitrary. It's to make sure that in the future you stay on good terms with these people that you'll continue to have an interaction with. Now, this isn't something that you just see in humans. Non-human primates do this as well. I actually had the fortune to work in a primate lab several years ago, where I got to observe baboons. Baboons are these kind of very large primates, and they're very what's called sexually dimorphic. That is, the differences between males and females within the species is quite noticeable. And one of the big differences is that the males tend to be much larger, more muscular, and when housed with other males, they tend to get aggressive. They tend to get territorial. And what you can often see is if two males are within a shared enclosure, they'll often get into fights. It might be bloody. They might pull hair out from one another. They hit one another, and then they go their separate ways. But what you usually see afterwards is that over time, one of them will come up to the other and usually start to groom. That is, start to do that where they kind of run their fingers through their hand, through their hair, they pick out parasites, they do a favor, they do something that feels good for the other baboon, and then hopefully that baboon will reciprocate. And the idea there is these individuals will have to continue to interact across time. And so it would be a good thing to make up after that conflict, show them that they still respect them, that they still want to get along. So humans do this, non-human primates do this as well. I've also looked at what are called morphometric cues of mate quality. Now that's a lot, but morphometric just means that it has to do with the shape or the style of the body or the face. And these are cues of what are called mate quality, that is, characteristics that one would look for in a potential sexual or romantic partner. What I've done is I've published work looking at the relative importance of 3 different characteristics to people's perceptions of others' faces, that is, especially the faces of potential romantic or intimate partners. And we identified 3 traits that seem to be quite important. We compared the relative importance of 3 different traits. One, I've already mentioned this, something called sexual dimorphism. That is the degree to which a person's face looks prototypically male or female. There are certain traits that systematically differ between men's and women's faces. For example, men tend to have, I'll try to orient myself in the camera here, men tend to have relatively wider jawbones. That is, the distance from particularly this point to this point tends to be larger among men, and I should say very broadly, males within a species compared to females. This is true, again, of humans and non-humans as well. Men tend to have more facial hair. Men's eyebrows tend to be somewhat thicker than women's. Men's eyes tend to be slightly smaller than women's. Now, that is not to say that it's significantly so, but if you actually measure in terms of millimeters, men on average do tend to have smaller eyes. Women tend to have more prominent cheekbones. So that is the degree to which you can kind of detect whether see a person's cheekbones easily. Women are more likely to have that. And the idea is that many of these traits are actually controlled by or influenced by the amount of hormones that an individual is exposed to, both in utero, that is when they were much younger and in the womb, as well as during puberty, which can shape the development of these traits. So we looked at the degree to which people care about these sexually dimorphic cues, compared to also what are called what's called fluctuating asymmetry. That is the degree to which a person's face does not appear perfectly symmetrical. The logic here is that when a person's face is more symmetrical, so everyone's face, basically from very early on, is programmed to be fairly symmetrical. That is, DNA codes for what's called bilateral symmetry. And this is, again, true for humans. You'll see this among other species as well. Most species have this line that you can draw down the center of the body and fold one half over the other. That's bilateral symmetry. Now, the extent to which you remain symmetrical, though, is dependent on a number of factors, such as how often you've been sick throughout your life, whether you've had any developmental issues growing up, or what are called developmental perturbations, that is, disruption to development. So it's an indicator of generally a person's developmental health. That is, if you are more asymmetrical, you are less symmetrical, that may indicate that you have had a harder time either finding proper nutrition, fighting off disease, etc. And so that could be an underlying cue that one would look for in a potential romantic partner if, say, you were going to pair up with this person for a while, have children with them, and ultimately pass on those qualities to children. Also, color cues to health. And when I say color cues to health, I don't mean skin color tied to things like ethnicity, but rather various levels of pigments within the skin. Turns out there are 3 predominant pigments in a person's skin. There are red pigments that contribute to flushness of the skin. That is when a person blushes. That would be what's called skin blood perfusion. That is how much blood is perfused or distributed within the face at a given time. Also, yellow pigmentations. So yellow pigmentations contribute to, an easy way to think about this is how healthy or glowing a face tends to appear. So someone can be kind of more washed out looking. You'll see this when someone is sick. They tend to have kind of what's called a pallid look to their face. And so having more yellow hues to the skin, this yellow pigmentation, can actually contribute to perceptions of healthiness. And then there are also blue pigmentations, which we don't perceive very easily consciously, but they actually do contribute to our perception of a person's health. Though yellow and red pigmentation seems to be some of the most important for these assessing a potential romantic partner. So we looked at these different characteristics, compared them, And one of the interesting findings that we determined was that people really cared about these sexually dimorphic cues, the degree to which a person appears more male or female, compared to symmetry or color cues to health. And this might suggest that there's something about those underlying levels of hormone that which contribute to sexual dimorphism that are very consequential to people's choices in who they select as a partner, potential romantic partner. Going from there, where I've actually progressed in my research is I now study the intersection between morality and romantic relationships. Morality broadly referring to what we consider right or wrong. One of the earliest studies I looked at at that intersection, at that crossover, are looking at what are called May-December romances. This is kind of an old-timey term. If no one's heard this, I don't blame you, but May-December romances refer to those in which someone who is much older is paired up with someone who is much younger. So I think colloquial terms, things like, a gold digger, right? Someone who is a much younger woman who's pairing up with a much older man, or it's kind of strange that women seem to have the derogatory names for these age mismatched things, because you also hear the term a cougar, right? A much older woman with a much younger man. Well, people tend to morally disapprove of these kinds of relationships. That is, compared to an age-matched relationship, age-discrepant relationships, or these May-December romances, tend to be perceived more negatively. And there are a number of reasons that might be the case. One that we tested in this study is we thought that the degree to which a relationship is perceived as transactional, that is, that these two people are together because they are explicitly getting something from one another. That is, maybe the much older men tend to have more social status, they tend to have more money, and so a man is going to have relatively more money when they're older, and men tend to seek women who are relatively younger. And so he may be expecting to get something like sex from a partner, versus a woman who's much younger who gets involved with a male who's much older might be interested in, say, his money or his support of her. So to the degree that the relationship is more transactional, people may judge these relationships as inappropriate, compared to these age match relationships where maybe you can be more certain that people are getting together because they have shared interests, because they have shared life goals and that they're the same stage of life. How we tested this was we looked at people's attitudes towards age-discrepant relationships compared to age-congruent ones, and we looked at the degree to which people's attitudes towards sex work or prostitution helped to explain attitudes towards these May-December romances. And in fact, that's what we found, is that people who were more likely to disapprove of sex work or prostitution were also more likely to disapprove of these of age discrepant relationships, that there was crossover in how that explained moral disapproval of these kinds of relationships. From there, where I've gone is I've started to look at the morality of a particular category of intimate relationship that is becoming more and more popular, called consensual non-monogamy. Those of you who have not heard of this, monogamy refers to romance, a pair bond between just two individuals. So that is, if you're finding a sexual or romantic partner, you're only establishing that relationship with one other person, and you're doing so exclusively. Consensual non-monogamy includes things like polyamory or swinging or open relationships, where partners agree that they can form these intimate attachments with other people outside of just that pair bond. Now, one of the interesting things about these relationships is these two tend to be relatively more stigmatized. They tend to be more disapproved of compared to monogamy. And yet, when you look at the scientific research on these relationships, they seem to be achieving comparable relationship quality to those who are in monogamous relationships. There seems to be this stigma against these relationships, which we don't quite understand. And so a lot of my current research is looking at the reasons for this stigma. Why do people tend to disapprove of consensually non-monogamous relationships? And in fact, I currently have a grant where I'm collecting data to address this question directly. So this is some of my work. Again, this is the work that I've published in peer-reviewed journals. I've had to collect this data, send it in, and people rip it apart, and it's a very arduous process, but ultimately a very rewarding one, because the ideal is that this is information that has been vetted, and so can be more likely to be trusted, or at least it's more rigorous in how it addresses information about romantic relationships, etc. Aside from all the professional stuff, I want to give you a few personal details about me. Just one thing, I'm a huge nerd. I love video games. I love playing video games. I like board games. For a long time, several years ago, unfortunately, I haven't found a lot of people to do this with, but I used to play Dungeons and Dragons with people. And I'll say, if you ever get the opportunity to play Dungeons and Dragons, I highly encourage it. If you are going through anything in your life, if you need to self-examine yourself, playing D&D and role-playing with other people will help you work through those issues. Don't know what I mean? Give it a try. You'll see. I would not consider myself a Redditor. However, of all the social media sites that exist, of the ones that I care to spend time on, I actually really enjoy Reddit. And the reason is, I think that it's populated by a number, I think it's, on average, I would guess that it's populated by people who are above average in intelligence. And I also just like the particular way in which social media is shared on the site. If you go to Facebook, if you go to Twitter, if you go to most other social media sites, what you have is the option where if you are scrolling through your newsfeed and you see something that you really like, what you can do is you can simply react to it. You can like it, you can get angry, you can cry, you can laugh, etc. There's no option, though, to dislike something, to say, hey, I don't think this belongs here, or I don't really think this is really newsworthy, or something that I want, people should have popping up in their newsfeed. And so Reddit has that. And so whether you see something on Reddit is really a combined total of the upvotes and downvotes that it has received, which I think is just possibly a much more responsible way of consuming social media. We'll talk a little bit about social media in this class as we go on, and some of the benefits and risks of it. I grew up in Pennsylvania, so in a small town called Wind Gap. It's about an hour north of Philadelphia. I went to college at a place called Albright College in Reading. I got my master's at a place called Bucknell, which is in central Pennsylvania. And then I moved to Michigan for about 5 years. For 5 years. I moved to Michigan for about 5 years, that's where I got my PhD. I lived in Pontiac, which is about just northwest of Detroit. So I spent a lot of time in Detroit during those years. Something fun about me, I really hate dressing formally. What you'll see in these recorded videos is generally I'll try to look professional and put together, but I also might wear a black t-shirt. I think the most important thing, and this is my expectation for all my students, is you should be dressing comfortably when you are attempting to learn something. You want as few distractions as possible, and I think that it's important that you're relaxed, that you set aside time to really engage with the material, and you don't necessarily have to worry about how you look. I suppose that's a nice thing about taking an asynchronous online class. If you haven't picked this up already, I actually really enjoy public speaking. I enjoy it not because it is inherently enjoyable to me, but rather that I recognize it's a challenge and it's a puzzle. My puzzle is I have to say something in just the right way that it makes sense to the people that I'm talking to. I have to explain something in a way that really resonates with my audience. And sometimes I accomplish that, sometimes I don't. When I do, though, it's very rewarding. And so I think I've gotten okay at that. I think I've gotten pretty good at that. And so now I actually really enjoy public speaking. I've figured out that puzzle. If you're interested in what wavelength I'm at, typically I drink tea, caffeinated tea. I think that compared to coffee tends to make me too stimulated, overstimulated. My attention actually tends to wander more if I'm overstimulated by coffee compared to tea. Tea is nice, right in the center. Not sweet tea. I realize that's a big faux pas, but I actually find that I drink too much sugar if I drink sweet tea. So unsweetened, caffeinated tea is where I'm at currently. And if you have any troubles with caffeination or feeling tired, you might actually be drinking too much coffee. We'll talk about this when we get to the section on consciousness and drug use, but what happens is if you start drinking too much caffeine, you can become more tolerant to it. So one of the most effective ways to consume caffeine or really any kind of drug is to do so in moderation, such that you do not become physically dependent on it, in this case for stimulation. What I am not. So I have been teaching for more than 10 years at this point. I have a fair amount of experience in it, and of course I have an experience doing research. But what I'm not is, I mean, I kind of have gray hairs going on here. It's kind of hard to see now. What I'm not, though, is someone who's been teaching for decades and decades and decades and decades. And so there may be a lot of questions that you all have of me that I'm not going to address here, that I do not state clearly, or that I do not explain well. If that's the case, I actually encourage you to reach out to me. I'll go over where you can do that, how you can do that, the email address that you can send your questions to get my response. I respond very quickly, but I realize I don't know everything, and I realize that there are things that I would love to address if I could. So I think I'm humble enough to say that I don't know everything, and there's tons of wisdom that I'm lacking. However, what I am is someone who has had experience in psychology, in psychological research for quite some time now. So if any of you are thinking about graduate school, if any of you are thinking about how to apply a degree in psychology, I'd be happy to talk to you about that. Give you some pointers about what directions you can take in your career. And of course, I think we'll have fun in this class. There's plenty of good content here. So that's the resource that I am to you. Before I can set you free to look at the first week's set of videos and begin class content, I need to give you a bit of a tutorial. So if you've never used Blackboard before, now if you're accessing this, you've already figured it out. But what I want to do is I want to give you a little bit of a tour of Blackboard and how this class is going to be organized so that you have that for yourself. I also need to ask you to complete something called a student information sheet, which I will highlight when we go over Blackboard. And then I want to go over the syllabus and look at what a normal week is going to look like. All right. The first thing you're going to notice when you pull up Blackboard is that I have pared this down to precisely what you need, no more, no less. The three labels you're going to use in this class will be content, which is where most things are. Gradebook, every so often you may want to check your grade. If grades are entered in the gradebook, then your final grade will be calculated accurately, so you can trust that. And then messages as well. If I send you any emails, this is where those emails will show up, copies of them. Please use this. Anyway, let's go back to content. The first thing you'll see here is a course participation confirmation quiz. This is something required by the university. Just get this out of the way. Do this now. Pause the video, take this. It takes 2 seconds. You just have to say, yes, I'm participating in this course. Once you're done with that, the next column here, what is due, this is going to be your lifeline for the entire semester. This will tell you, as you would guess, what is due. Each week, this is going to update. So the first week is already here. But these are locked. Each of these will open up on that Monday at 11:59 p.m. All right, so around midnight. But let's dig into this. If you open up what is due, it'll tell you, so the following is due at 11:59 on Monday. What I recommend is that you complete this in the order that it is listed. So first, watch the 2 lecture videos. You're already watching the course introduction, and then after this, you should go and continue on to the Chapter 1 History of Psychology section. After that, I recommend that you go into the textbook and read Chapter 1, but only the material that is covered in the recorded lectures. The exams will be about the recorded lecture content. So if it's not in the recorded lectures, you don't have to worry about it. Then, once you're done with this, complete and submit the Chapter 1 exam, and I'll show you where to access these in a moment. And then anything else that's here is going to be listed. Sometimes there will be assignments, hypotheses, research proposals. This week, what I would ask you to do is complete the student information sheet, which will be located under the syllabus and course docs section in Blackboard, which I'll show you in just a second. All right, but every week, if you're confused about what to do, visit here. But if you want more of a detailed outline and you want to know what's going to happen next, here's the course schedule. Now, this can be found at the end of the syllabus, which I'll show you. But if you open this up, this will give you a text-based, it's kind of a graphic, right? Representation of what's going to be expected each week. So for this first week, this is the introduction to psychology, and then we're going to be getting into the research in psychology. You'll notice that this course schedule across the semester is divided into 4 different units. Unit 1, 2, 3, and 4 down here. In Unit 1, what we're first going to be doing is looking at, well, why do we need psychology to be a science? If you think about it, we are all pretty good experts in understanding other people's minds. You read other people's minds all the time, and some of you may think, I have a pretty good grasp of how the mind works. What's funny is that, well, we have a problem when we're when we're researching the mind, because we're using the mind to ask questions about the mind. And there are some limitations to that. There are some systematic errors that our brain will make when asking questions about the world. And the most popular term for this within the psychological sciences is what's called cognitive bias. We'll dive into the deepities of this, but what we use the scientific method for is to help us to avoid some of those cognitive biases. So we're going to look at why we need psychology to be a science. Then we're going to get into some of the nuts and bolts in Unit 2. Here we'll learn about some of the building blocks of the brain, neurons, as well as how we can string neurons together, string these building blocks together to create a whole brain, and then how this brain is capable of learning and recording memories. Here's a big assumption that was going to follow us throughout the semester. Everything that occurs within your brain, your mind, your emotions, how you think, this feeling that you are a person and that you have a personality, all of that is based in the natural world. There is a machine inside of you that is generating that information, those feelings, those thoughts. And so we're going to look into, well, how could you do this? How is our brain capable of generating these sensations? So we'll get into that in Unit 2. Once we have that basic understanding, in Unit 3, we'll start to piece everything together to explain subjective experience. That is, that feeling that you are here, you are listening right now, and you are having your own personal, individual experience of the world. How do you create that from the nuts and bolts of neurons? So we'll go into sensation and perception. That is, how does the brain take in information from the outside world? And then once that information is in there, how does the brain perceive it? How does it make sense of all that information? We'll then get into consciousness. We'll talk a little bit about some philosophy of consciousness, because this really is considered the final frontier of psychology as a science. It's really difficult to study. What does it mean to be a conscious being? So we're going to get into that a little bit, but then we're going to narrow it down to 2 particular subjects that I think will be very useful to you. We'll talk about sleep and what it means to get good sleep and why sleep is critical. Usually that's something that college students need help with. And the other thing that college students sometimes need help with is drugs. So we're going to talk about drugs here. This is not going to be, and I don't know if it's called DARE programs anymore, but anti-drug programs. This is not going to be an anti-drug program. I'm not going to say, oh, stay away from all drugs, kids. Here, I want to explain, well, what do drugs do to the nervous system? That is, if you elect to put any kind of drug in your body, whether that is just Advil, a painkiller, or if it's coffee and you're taking in caffeine, or if you're smoking or ingesting THC, the active ingredient in marijuana, what does that do to your nervous system, and how will that change your conscious experience? I want to make you more responsible consumers of that kind of information. So that's what we'll get into in that section. Then we'll close the semester out with Unit 4, which will look at psychological development and then pathology. Up to this point, at this point in the class, you're going to know a lot about psychology. So here we want to explain, well, how do these capacities change over the lifespan? That is, if we're talking about this brain capable of taking in information, making sense of the world, how does that differ from when you're a newborn infant versus when you're a toddler, versus when you're an adolescent, versus when you're an adult? So we're going to trace some of that development. And then once we understand, well, what does typical development look like, we'll start to look at some aspects of atypical development, or when psychology becomes disordered, when your brain isn't quite working in the way that perhaps you want it to, and what that looks like and what options are available to us. Then there's, luckily, this is nice timing this semester, Thanksgiving break right before the comprehensive exam will be due, so you'll have some time to study, to relax, to kind of chill and digest what you've learned, and then the comprehensive exam will be due. All right, so this is your course schedule. Again, this is going to be at the end of the syllabus as well. The other thing that you should pay attention to is on the right-hand side. All of this is going to be listed under what is due, but if you really want to see a snapshot of, oh, well, what am I going to have to do this week versus do I have to plan for longer writing assignments? Each of the assignments that are due are listed on the right-hand side here. So in addition to the exams, we have each of the hypothesis assignments, which I'll go over, and then the research proposals, which I'll go over as well. Okay, so that's the course schedule. If you go down to here to syllabus and course docs, if you're looking for something in this class and you cannot find it, it's probably under syllabus and course docs. So at the very top, we have the syllabus. I'll show you that in a second. Here's the textbook. If you click on this link, it's going to bring you to a page where it says, hey, here's your book. It's been unpublished by the original publisher, but you can still access it at these two different links, Sailor and LibreTexts. I recommend that you go there. The content is still great. The reason that it was unpublished is for reasons that are unrelated to the quality or the usefulness of the book for this class. So this is how you access your textbook. Technology FAQ, this is something that the University of South Carolina's Student Retention Committee put together to help students who you're new to college, maybe you're experiencing some tech difficulties with your account, with your computer, whatever it happens to be. I recommend, before anything else, going to this technology FAQ and seeing if there is an easy solution that you can find yourself. And if this doesn't work, then please get in contact with information technology, or what is the help desk at the university, and they'll help you out. The Opportunity Scholars Program. This is an excellent program available to all students. You sign up for it, and what they do is, if you are part of this organization, you get access to a number of resources that other students don't get access to, including things like individual tutoring and advising. There are OSP, which is the abbreviation, Opportunity Scholars Program, workshops that are put on throughout the semester. They host different student activities and cultural events. You get access to computer labs and other resources that are specifically for OSP members. And in some cases, you might be eligible for financial grant assistance. So click on this link if you want to join. It's very easy to join. It's a very quick application. There's no cost to doing it, and it does give you access to each of these benefits. Here is that student information sheet I mentioned the very first week. I want you to complete this. This is where that is. It just asks for some basic info. What is your name? What's your major? Why are you taking this class? What do you hope to get out of it? I try to tailor this class as best I can to my audience. And when you give me this information, it helps me to do that. So if you want a better quality experience, help me out, submit your information. Just tell me why you're here. There is a research participation component to this class. I'll go over this in more detail when each of these, when the research becomes available. But in short, here is a handout that explains everything. You're going to be expected to participate in 2 online studies and then 2 in-lab studies. Dr. Gottsman, the other psychology, one of the other psychology professors on campus, she runs these lab studies. I typically do most of my research online. So you'll access and you can complete these. The online studies are already available. So if you want to get this requirement out of the way now, you can start with those online studies. And when the lab studies become available, I will email everyone so that you know. But of course, I can't coerce you to participate in any kind of research. So if you do not want to participate, you still need to earn these 2 lab credits, 2 online credits. You can do that through these alternative assignments, which are you'll read a published peer-reviewed academic paper, then you'll write a 2-page critique about it, and then you submit that to me. And for each of these critiques, you will earn 1 credit. So if you, for example, don't want to do any lab credits, You could do 2 online studies and then complete 2 alternative assignments, and that would give you all 4 of those credits that are required. All right, so keep this in mind. I'll have some reminders throughout the semester to complete this requirement. Here's some optional readings. Throughout the semester, I'm going to reference some outside materials, some things that are not in the book or that I'm not really going to expect you to read, but I might make a claim, and then I want to back up that claim. Any claim, any kind of source materials that I need to back up those claims, I'll put in this optional readings folder, and you can look at that at your leisure. So if you're bored one day and you're thinking, I have nothing else to do, I guess I'll just read the optional readings for psych. Here you go. That's how you do that. For Chapter 7, the learning chapter, we're going to have some worksheets that you'll need to complete. You won't need to turn them in, but you'll use them as practice. You'll access them here. And then there is going to be a comprehensive exam study guide. It's not available yet, but when the time comes around, it will be made available to you. So again, that is under syllabus and course docs. All the recorded lectures are here. So each week when things are updated on that Monday night, the new videos will become available. So you can just track that here. And then for hypotheses and proposals, these are those other assignments. I'll go over those in a second that I told you would be here. But here's an outline that describes how to do those assignments. If you have any questions about these assignments, you'll see this in a second. This is a very detailed outline. It tells you precisely what I expect for these assignments, so there shouldn't be any confusion. However, I do give some tips and guidelines in my lecture at one point. I've uploaded these tips and guidelines directly to Blackboard in case you want them for reference. And then when you have to submit these assignments, you'll find the submission links there. And then the exams, which will also be made available each week. You'll find these here. You click on those, complete them. That will submit your responses to me. You won't immediately have these graded. These exams I grade manually. So you're going to submit these, and what I'll do is usually the next morning or a few days after they are due, I will post them, and you'll have that. But do not expect them to be posted immediately. They won't be. All right. So that's Blackboard. That's everything you need. The other thing I'd like to go over is if you go here and you access the syllabus, this is what the syllabus looks like. So very quickly, this is Introduction to Psychology. Welcome. It's fall 2025. This is the course section. My office hours. I don't have any for this class because it's an online class. I'm in my office pretty often, so if you're on campus and you stop by, you might find me. But if you want to meet with me for any reason, I recommend that you email me because I might be on one campus or another depending on the day. Email me, schedule an appointment. I'm happy to sit down with you. I'm happy to talk with you, call with you, whatever your preference is. Or if you just want to email me, this is the email address that you should get in contact with me using. I recommend not using the Blackboard messaging app to send messages to me. I don't get notified about those messages as reliably as I get notified about my email messages. So just if it's something that you want addressed quickly, better to email me directly. Here's the course description. You can read that through that on your own time. Here's the link to those to the textbook. This is pretty boring. Outcomes, objectives, course objectives. Read through that on your own time. Here's what you want to know about the grade determination. This class is determined in part by your participation, which is 10% of the course grade, and that is something that I determine through the special mechanisms that I have for tracking people's activity on Blackboard. So if you're on Blackboard, you're accessing the assignments, you're completing everything, you're turning in your grades. If you're being consistent, you're going to get a complete full 10% of the participation. If you fall behind, if you're just turning things in late consistently, that's where those points are going to come off. All right? So do yourself that favor. Just stay consistent. The exams. This is going to be worth 40% of your overall course grade. Stay consistent with these. The exams are administered online. They're due 1 week from when they are available. And all the exams are going to be multiple choice. They're kind of difficult, especially the comprehensive exam. But they're pretty straightforward. The comprehensive exam, this comes at the end of the semester. This is going to be worth, in total, 20% of your course grade. This will contain multiple choice questions as well, but it will be from any chapter during the semester, and I tend to make this final exam pretty difficult. So stay on top of your content, study hard. You should do just fine, but don't think it's going to be easy. Hypotheses, these are going to be worth 10% of your course grade. So each of these assignments, which I'll describe in a second in more detail, each of these assignments is going to be a short, one paragraph, very short, description of a research hypothesis that you would like to test. It's just a personal question that you have about the world and about how the mind works. See the course schedule for when these are due, and then there is that document, the research and hypotheses proposals outline on Blackboard that gives you details and instructions. Then what you're going to do is you're going to take one of these hypotheses that you've written, and you're going to expand that into a full research proposal. Each of the in total, these will be worth 20%. Each of them, you'll complete 2 of them across the semester, are worth 10%. So you'll write 2 proposals by the end of the semester. Each will be a 2-page, concise, double-spaced, which really means just 1 page, in which you will elaborate one of your hypotheses. All right, so again, the instructions are in that outline. And then for extra credit, I do offer extra credit in this class if you complete your research participation credit. Remember that you have 4 credits that you have to complete. If you complete research participation beyond those 4 credits, you complete an extra online study, an extra 2 online studies. For each extra study that you complete, you're going to get 1% on your final grade. That is a huge boost for those who may need it. So please remember that this is available to you. For grade calculation, everything is on Blackboard. If it's on Blackboard, everything's being calculated correctly, so just go there. My class expectations, a lot of this is boilerplate. You've probably seen this in other classes, but just a few notes. Clearly, you're going to be using Blackboard a lot, so make sure that you have access to it and that that access doesn't go away. Check in on that every so often, make sure. You already know where to start. One thing that I would recommend is that you please make sure that you are checking your email consistently. That is going to be my main way of getting in contact with you. If you are not in the habit of checking your USC email account, link it to another email account or link it to something else so that you get notifications that you're going to see when you get emails from me or any of your other professors. That will save you a lot of headache. So do that for yourself, please. Here's that description of research participation. There is a penalty if you do not complete this, so please make sure that you are doing your research participation by the end of the semester. The course schedule is where I said it would be. It's also at the end of the syllabus. Academic conduct, just don't cheat, respect the educational process. I'm going to show you, talk a little bit about AI and plagiarism down here in a second. If you need to add or drop a class, this is where you can go. You can go to the office of the registrar. Be aware that to get a full refund on a class, the deadline for that is pretty early. So keep your eyes on that and make that decision early rather than later. You don't want to lose money. Disability support services. If you need an accommodation of any sort, please get in contact with me, but also get in contact with disability support services. I'm absolutely happy to work with anyone who needs it. All right. AI is everywhere. We got to talk about it. I don't ban AI. AI is just fine if you want to use Grok or ChatGPT or anything else, Claude, to help you write your papers. That's totally fine. However, you should be aware of better and worse ways of using it. If you just take the instructions for an assignment and put it into one of these programs, it might write a paper for you. But what you're doing is you are robbing yourself of the educational process. So part of this class is you are engaging with ideas that are original, that are your own, and writing a paper on your own is its own struggle. It's part of the learning process. If you don't engage with that, you do end up losing out on something. So what I recommend that you do, I think the smarter way to use these tools is write the paper first in your own words, then use AI as a copy editor. Take that paper that you've written and tell it, hey, ChatGPT, please look at my grammar, try to, kind of tighten up some of the language. Is there anything that doesn't make sense? And it will do a pretty good job of doing that. The consequences of using this to write a paper for you is that often these kind of LLMs can hallucinate things. They can say things that aren't true or make claims that aren't clear, or it just doesn't sound right. I've gotten pretty good at detecting AI written material. And again, it's okay if it's copy edited that way. But for your own sake, for your own learning, I recommend that you use AI responsibly and learn to use it responsibly. You'll be losing out on something if you don't. And in extreme cases, if you are relying on AI, one of the things that these programs will do is they will take information that already exists on the internet somewhere or somewhere else, and they will use that exact language to generate the essay that you've asked it to generate, which means that there is a risk that you might plagiarize something. If you're not familiar what plagiarism is, it's when you pass off other people's work as if it's your own. And this has always been true. Plagiarism is extremely penalized within universities. If you get caught plagiarizing someone else's work, usually you fail that assignment, if not the whole class, and in some cases you might get expelled from the university, not allowed to come back. Don't take that risk, all right? Another reason to use these tools sparingly. By the way, I do use software. I check everyone's everything that gets submitted onto Blackboard. It goes through Turnitin, which is a program for checking for plagiarism, as well as kind of the cutting edge developments in AI. So just really don't take that risk. All right. Then you have your course schedule here. We've already gone through this. And then if you go down here, here's the grading scale in case you're concerned or interested in how the percentages get converted to a letter grade. Here you are. So that is the syllabus. I also would like to go over this research hypotheses and proposals outline. Again, this is uploaded to Blackboard. It is underneath hypotheses and research proposals, that tag in Blackboard. I want to read this introductory paragraph, and then I want to just kind of open this document and let you peruse it at your own time to understand how these assignments are going to go. I will be covering in more detail what you need to do for these hypothesis assignments in the Chapter 2 introduction. But here's what I'd like to read. So humans form beliefs about what is true and what is not. We form these beliefs by observing the world, detecting associations, and using this knowledge to make decisions. Now, brains are well designed to detect and record patterns, but sometimes we detect and record patterns that aren't real. We believe things that seem true, but are not. To overcome this problem, we have developed the scientific method, a procedure for assessing a belief's veracity, its truthfulness. For this class, you will practice using the scientific method to examine several beliefs that you have about the human mind and the behavior it produces. Over the course of the semester, you will write 4 scientific psychological research hypotheses and 2 research proposals. A research hypothesis is a tentative statement or prediction about the relationship between 2 things, or what I will be calling variables, an independent and a dependent variable. For example, you may believe that a person's political beliefs, such as being Republican, Democrat, or Independent, is somehow related to their willingness to wear a mask during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, though this answer to the question might seem obvious to you, you can't be certain that your belief is true without evidence. So each research proposal will be an opportunity to take one of your hypotheses, these things that you predict that you believe are true, and then design an experiment to test it. Descriptions for each assignment begin on the next page. Please be mindful of the due dates, which appear on that course schedule, and each assignment should be submitted in Blackboard. Make sure that you follow these formatting guidelines for submission. And then, as you go to complete these assignments, read through the outline for each. So there's a hypothesis outline, which tells you how to do the hypotheses, and then separately there's the research proposal outline. Read through this. If you have questions after seeing the Chapter 2 introductory video, please contact me, and of course I am happy to meet and help you with these assignments. All right, so that's that. Again, back to our PowerPoint. I think we've gone just about over everything that you need to do, that need to know to succeed in this class. A few other bits of information. As you watch the other recorded lectures, I want to note how I organize my slides, because this will help you organize your notes for studying later. At the very top of every slide, you're going to see a section header. And this is a header that's going to be there for as long as we are talking about that particular topic. So in the first lecture, we're going to talk about history. I will have several slides dedicated to simply presenting different aspects of history. Underneath that, the first bullet point will be a major idea or topic. Then anything that is indented underneath that particular heading is going to belong within that heading. So for example, we'll talk about psychoanalysis and Freud. Those 2 points, that Freud is known for a lot of things, the unconscious and early life experiences, each of those belongs under psychoanalysis. Likewise, when it says processes in the mind which occur automatically, or thought processes, memories, interests, and motivations, those belong underneath unconscious. So each of those are describing unconscious. So you should be, as you're taking notes for this class, which you should do, as you're taking notes for this class to study later, I recommend organizing your notes in this way. Also, I'll be using examples a lot. What I'll do is I will give you a definition of something, I'll explain it a little bit, and then I will usually relate it to something that you already know, or something that is much more, that is not technical. When I mention these examples, write them down. They will not usually appear on the slides, so make a note of them so that later when you're looking at your notes, you go, geez, psychoanalysis, what was that? And then you see that you wrote down an example that I gave, and you can say, yes, of course, I remember that example. That helps me remember what psychoanalysis is. So organize your notes in this way, write down the examples that I use. All right, so what are we going to cover in this class? We're going to talk about some pretty difficult subjects. I want to warn everyone of that. We're going to talk about psychological disorders later in the class. We'll talk about drug use and abuse. We'll talk about sexuality simply because this is my area of research and I think extensively about relationships, sexuality, etc. We'll talk about consciousness, what it means to be a conscious organism. And related to that, we'll talk a little bit about whether humans have free will or not, whether we are in many ways like a squishy computer. What features of our nervous system and the way that our brain and our nervous system works, how does that mirror what a computer does? What are the similarities? And of course, what are the differences? Because we are not just computers, but we do share a lot of features with them. Before we can get to this really juicy stuff, though, we gotta go over the basics. And that makes it sound like this isn't juicy. It is. What I want to do in the first chapter is go over how psychology is a science and why it needs to be a science. What does it mean for something to be a scientific study of the mind relative to other styles of knowing or generating knowledge? We need to start there, and that's going to be where we take off. So again, that's all for the introduction. Move on to the next set of videos, and if you have questions, of course, contact me. Thanks, everybody.